Welcome, everyone, to another Perfectly Holistic podcast. I am so excited to be back with you guys today. We have a very special guest, somebody I've been following for quite some time, and she may not even know it. But that's just because of the circles that we run in, and we are in the same learning platforms and well, Dr. Recker, you're just amazing. And you have really, really cool friends and colleagues that are mentors to those of us who have been on this journey for a little while with a hunger and desire to learn. We want knowledge to make our pets' lives better and healthier and live longer. And so that's kind of how I found you through Inside Scoop and, Dr. Karen Becker, who I know is your bestie, and Rodney and all those amazing people that we look up to so much for all that they contribute to the pet space. But my goodness, you have quite a background yourself, and I know you've been at this for quite a long time. So for people who don't know who you are, why don't you just share a little bit about what you do?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all. And yes, I agree. I do have some super cool friends and colleagues. And I think that I get to meet a lot of super cool people just in this kind of space that we're in together.
Mhm.
Getting to connect with a lot of neat people is really one of the great benefits of that. So thank you for having me. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I'm a veterinarian, and I started my veterinary journey pretty conventionally, worked in conventional practice for a long time, and then started to kind of dabble in some more integrative modalities. I became certified in veterinary spinal manipulation therapy. That's chiropractic, but you can't say that in Wisconsin, which is where I got certified. So it's VSMT, but it's chiropractic.
Right.
Um, yeah, and that was around the same time that I started really becoming super interested in nutrition.
Mm.
So that was happening. I had young children, so I was really interested in nutrition for them. And
Mhm.
I find it funny that a lot of us, I think, make that leap. Like, we're either interested in feeding ourselves or our children better. So then we're like, oh, wait, my pets need better nutrition too.
Mhm.
Or the opposite happens.
Yeah.
People are like, I want to feed my pet the best. And then they're like, huh, I just looked at my own diet. It could
Mhm.
use a little tune up. So that's what kind of got me started going down this path. And I also spent about 7 years being the program director for a veterinary technician program at a
Mhm.
community college, and that was very fulfilling to teach vet tech students
Yeah.
and to have the opportunity to present them what I hope was a balanced curriculum, showing them conventional therapies, but also dabbling in some other things that might pique their interest, and maybe they could choose to incorporate that into their professional life as well. And then for the last about 3 or 4 years, I've been with Animal Diet Formulator. And so my role now has become mostly nutrition consulting, and diet formulation is primarily
Mhm.
what I do. So I work with individuals as well as with commercial companies for fresh food diet formulations. And so I've really enjoyed taking a super deep dive into pet nutrition, which, as you're probably aware, as your viewers are probably aware, or maybe you're not, but in vet school, we get like almost no meaningful education on nutrition. So
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned the bulk of what I know about animal nutrition just in the last few years, and not in the preceding 20 years as a veterinarian. Yeah.
Right. And you know what? Hats off to you and thank you for doing that because not all vets will take the time or interest
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
learning outside of their box that they were taught in vet school. They get so ingrained in the traditional, well, this is how I was taught and this is how we've always done it kind of mentality. And
Mhm.
so, like you were saying, it tends something tends to come in and be the trigger to either knock us off of our health or our pet's health, to wake us up, to put us in some kind of a crisis mode, um, to make us start to question things and to want to learn how to do differently in order to get a different result or a better outcome than what we've been doing. And I find that even in my friends who are in like the who own small pet businesses like healthy pet stores, they struggle a lot with the whole cognitive dissonance. Well, my vet says I need to be feeding, veterinary food, and they can't go off of this food, and they have urinary, and they have to be on this diet, and they have blah 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 blah. And so they get so programmed, and so it's so refreshing when people come across our paths that are just like, I want to learn. I want to learn how to do fresh. How do I feed my cat raw food? How do I do something other than, the bag on the shelf? And so it's exciting that there's a hunger and to have this knowledge and to grow. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And you can see that if you look at the industry numbers for pet food, the fresh food segment is the fastest growing segment right now. So the
Yes.
word's getting out, and people are talking more and more about it, which I love. And it's becoming less taboo because it has been taboo for quite
Yeah.
some time. So it's good
Yes.
that we're having this discussion.
Yes, and you work a lot with Steve Brown, right? And
Yeah.
was he the original raw diet formulator for dog food back in the 90s or something like that?
Yeah. 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 I had the amazingly good fortune to be Steve Brown's literal next door neighbor. So I sat next to him. I would go over to his house with my coffee and sit next to Steve, and he would teach me how to formulate on his giant, massive, super scary Excel spreadsheet that I still can't work to this day.
Right.
But ADF is much easier to use. So yeah, Steve Brown taught me all about formulation, and
Mhm.
he created Steve's Real Food back in the 90s, which was the first complete and balanced commercially available raw food for dogs. And for everybody out there, he is no longer affiliated with Steve's Real Food. That he sold that company fairly quickly, but he started the movement. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, I like to call him like the grandfather of the movement, the fresh food
Yeah.
movement. Yeah. What a gift to be able to sit next to him and learn,
Oh,
his brain and all. Oh, wow, I'm jealous.
yeah. Yeah. I know how fortunate I was to have that
Um,
experience.
that's awesome. So first of all, I want to say hi to Jay Kennedy. Jay Kennedy is watching. Thank you so much,
Hi,
Jay. I know
Jay.
yesterday was her birthday,
Happy
and,
birthday.
and I know she's aging in reverse. I think she's getting younger as we go along here, and she's
Mhm.
in Spain right now. They're in Spain and
Mhm.
getting ready for the raw food conference diet.
Raw
That's
Feeding Vet Society. I think
yes,
that's what it's called.
yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So this lines up nicely with what they're going to be talking about over the next few days or so.
Mhm.
But let's talk about like the changes that you've seen in the whole industry of fresh versus processed foods. We were
Mhm.
kind of visiting a little bit before we started about what you see is a big concern that's coming up these days.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that I'm most acutely aware of is that commercial foods are formulated to deliver adequate nutrients, assuming a certain intake level. And
Mm,
that intake level is too high for most of our dogs and cats. So if we were to feed the amount of food that it takes to deliver adequate nutrients to our cats, the vast majority of our cats would be obese. And
mhm,
so that puts us all in a really unfortunate position where we have to choose, do I feed my cat enough to get all their nutrients and then they're fat? Or do I feed them the right amount so that they maintain ideal body condition and they're nutrient deficient?
mm,
And that can look different depending on what type of food you're feeding. So if you're feeding an ultra processed food like a kibble or a canned food, most of those manufacturers use a vitamin mineral premix. They just pour in a whole bunch of supplements, and so those foods are usually not micronutrient deficient, not deficient in vitamins and minerals.
right.
But for kitties, the big concern is protein.
Mhm,
Those foods can be deficient in protein when our cats are eating the right number of calories to maintain their body weight. In fresh foods, we have the opposite problem. Fresh foods are usually super meat heavy, which
right.
is great for cats. Cats are obligate carnivores. So those are typically not protein deficient, even for less active kitties. But when we rely on whole foods to meet our micronutrient needs, there's usually not as big a buffer there. And so oftentimes those micronutrient levels, like say potassium or magnesium, sometimes those are just barely skating above the minimum when we're looking to get them from whole food sources. So if we're feeding less, cats might be deficient in those micronutrients. So
Mhm,
it's a problem that is pervasive no matter what type of food you're feeding, and it's because of the nutrient profiles set by AFCO. So this is a big thing that I'm really worried about right now.
Right. And for those people who don't know who AFCO is, can you give like a brief description?
Yeah, so AFCO is the American Association of Feed Control Officials. That's what AFCO stands for. And so it's a group that sets a nutrient requirements for dog and cat food in the U.S. And they don't um, verify pet foods. They don't approve pet foods. It's not like that. They just set, here are what the nutrient requirements are, but
Mhm.
they are super in the weeds on checking to make sure that pet food labels like are in the right font and have
Mhm.
things in the right place. Like they're super into making sure all those regulations are met. Not so much into like, is this a high quality ingredient, or is this truly delivering adequate nutrition? Not so much there. So sometimes there's this perception that if the food has the label complete and balanced to AFCO nutrient standards, everyone's like, oh, it's great, it's AFCO certified and it's perfect. Not so much. Like
Right.
they provide some guidance, but it's not a gold stamp of approval.
That's a good way to say it. And I've been saying this for several years now. I feel like because there's such a distinct difference between processed feed grade food versus fresh
Mhm.
food diets, there almost needs to be two separate regulatory overseers because your quality is different, your sourcing is different. There's so many different features, like you said, if you're going to use whole food ingredients to meet all these vitamin and mineral and all the
Mhm.
micronutrient requirements versus the stuff that they want to put in pet food that's really not appropriate. Why don't we have two separate bodies overseeing that? Because AFCO is never going to approve and applaud you guys who are preaching from the rooftops of fresh food and meeting all these requirements with quality ingredients. They're going to go with this other side all the time, and that's who they side with, right? Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I if it's frustrating because it's like you can't put new wine into old wineskins. You can't just change a system. You have to build a completely different model. You know,
Mhm.
they don't talk to each other nice. They don't get along. You know, they don't have the same goals in mind. So that
Yeah.
would be like, in an ideal world, I would see a whole separate, you know, oversee regulate not even necessarily, I don't want to call it regulatory, but guidelines for
Yeah.
this type of food versus this feed grade versus food grade. That's really what it is.
Mhm.
It's apples and
Yeah.
oranges to me. I don't know how
Yeah.
you feel, but it really is.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that's something that people aren't aware of. You know, if a person picks up a bag of dry cat food and they're reading the ingredient label and they see chicken, most people are envisioning like when you go to the store and you buy chicken breasts to make for your
Right,
own family for dinner, and that's probably not what's going into that bag of cat food.
right.
So there is a lack of transparency there, and the average person, unless they delve into it and do a deep dive, they would never know that that is not the quality of ingredient that's going into their pet's food.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So let's talk a little bit about fresh versus processed. Are there
Mhm.
benefits on both sides when it comes to cats?
Mhm.
And how would you
Yeah.
approach someone who's if they came to you and they said, you know, I'm interested in feeding my cat as healthy as I can, but you know, my vet says avoid this kind of food because it's
Mhm.
terrible, but they want to give me their kind of food, and people are just kind of left confused, and so they don't know which way to go.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing I do want to tuck in there is just to speak to the veterinarians and what their recommendations are. You know, I was there for a while. I started off in conventional medicine. Like I mentioned, we got like zero education in nutrition. So we were taught, you know, if it's got the AFCO label on it, you're assured that it's good. And if you stick with the big guys, they know what they're doing,
Mhm.
and you can feel confident in that nutrition. And so um, I I don't want to come across giving the impression that I think that my colleagues are intentionally steering people wrong. They are giving the advice that they believe to be true based on what they learned, right? And it does require that deep dive to find the information that's different than what is presented, that little bit that is presented. So when we look at fresh food, there aren't as many options as there are ultra processed food that's been around for, well, I shouldn't say it's been around longer. Fresh food's been around a lot longer, right? Like there was real food way before there was a bag of kibble.
Yes.
But in recent years, popularity has been mostly ultra processed food versus fresh food. So I think there's an inherent distrust of something that's new, and people don't, they're not fully versed in it, and so they don't trust it, and so there's an aspect of that going on. But if we look at the actual constituents of the food and line up fresh food versus ultra processed food, there are some big differences, and there are pros and cons to both, and it all depends on what your goal is. Now, like you mentioned, if someone is looking to feed the healthiest food possible, then I would say there's kind of two main criteria that I have for that. One is that it is complete and balanced, and what that means is it delivers all of the essential nutrients that cats need in the amounts they need, in the number of calories they need. So that's the number one. It's got to have all the stuff in it that cats need. The number two is, I believe that those things are best delivered in a food matrix. So if it is a real food, as opposed to, when I say ultra processed, what I mean is these are things that started off as some sort of edible product, and it's been typically high heat processed in some way, and it's been maybe ground or pulverized or whatever. So it's no longer really recognizable as the thing it started as. And it may still contain those essential nutrients, but it's lost a lot of other things along the way. And those other things might be important, so the things that we consider essential nutrients are the minerals, the vitamins, the amino acids, the fatty acids that science has discovered cats have to have in a certain amount or they'll die. Like that's why they're essential, right? And cats can't make them on their own. There are some nutrients that are essential, but they don't have to be essential in the diet because the cat's body can make it. So we don't have to supply those things in food. But what I'm talking about now is, what about the stuff we don't know yet? So, somebody discovered that the essential nutrients we have now were essential at some point. What if there's something else that's essential and we don't know it yet that would allow cats to thrive better if they had, X amount of Y nutrient in their food? If we're delivering nutrients in food, we have a better chance of even accidentally providing those other things that we don't know are essential yet. The other piece of this, though, is the more we process food, the more other things that maybe we don't want become incorporated into that food. So the more we process food, the more we change it from its original state, particularly with heat. That's one of the big ones. The more we introduce a whole bunch of chemical reactions and compounds that are formed from that, and some of those chemical compounds can have some pretty adverse effects on health. So if I'm looking for food that's going to support health the best way we can, it's going to be complete and balanced, and it's going to be as fresh as possible. Now, that may not be, there's a whole spectrum there. People may not be able to go all the way to the end of the spectrum that encompasses both of those points fully. I'm really not willing to give up on the complete and balanced one. I'm just not. Like, I can't, as a veterinarian, encourage people to feed deficient diets, because we know that nutritional deficiencies cause disease. So I can't go there. So that means that we're still on that spectrum of ultra processed to totally fresh. And where you fall on that depends on a lot of things. It depends on what's your budget, because unfortunately, ultra processed tends to be a lot less expensive than fresh food. It depends on what's your lifestyle, and can you prepare or store or portion out fresh food as often as you need to, or do you need to have something that's shelf stable? Maybe you're traveling a lot, and or will your cat eat it? Now, most kitties, you can eventually transition off of ultra processed food to fresh food, but for some, they're stubborn little Dickens, and it takes a
Yeah.
little minute to get there.
Hmm.
So all of those things are factors that people have to take into account when they figure out where on that spectrum they can fall, from kibble, canned food, air dried, dehydrated, freeze dried, gently cooked, raw. All of those are options on that spectrum.
Yes. That's a great point because I don't think people realize how many options there really are.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we
Most,
talk about fresh food, and that can encompass anything from raw, gently cooked, um, freeze dried, and then we get into the air dried, dehydrated, baked, all that kind of stuff, and we're getting more and more processed. But you're right, there's more to fresh than just raw, and sometimes I think people think it's just raw.
yeah, exactly. So let's talk about some of those. I'm going to call it what it is, carcinogens that can
Hmm.
end up in pet food. And can you explain to cat parents who are feeding the process, maybe from even what processed foods and ultra processed foods do contain more of the carcinogens and the chemical reactions that have negative adverse effects on the health of their cats? Can we talk a
Hmm.
little bit about that?
Okay, yes. All right, let's get sciencey for a second. Um, so a big category of those carcinogens comes from what are called advanced glycation end products and also advanced lipid oxidation, lipoxidation end products.
Hmm.
So both of those can be endogenous or exogenous. Endogenous means it happens in the body, exogenous means it's happening out of the body, and then cats are eating it in their food.
Right.
So what happens in heating food is something called the Maillard reaction. So when a protein combines with either a carbohydrate or a fat and
Hmm.
it's heated, then it creates these end products. So protein plus carb plus heat makes an advanced glycation end product. Protein plus fat plus heat makes an advanced lipoxidation end product.
Hmm.
And both of those have deleterious effects within the body. So when we heat foods, and particularly when we heat them at super high heat and we heat them multiple times, like we're doing with, those chicken meals that are super heated before they're even put into the food, and then it's heated again and it's extruded. It's being heated multiple times before it ends up in that bag. So
Yeah.
more and more and more of those ages and ales, advanced glycation end products, are being produced and end up in the food, and then the kitty is eating those compounds that can cause lots of bad stuff to happen in the body.
Mhm.
So what those compounds can do, they're implicated in cancer, like you mentioned, they're carcinogenic, and they also just increase widespread inflammation and aging.
Mhm.
So they may be implicated in diabetes or kidney disease or heart disease, and just overall inflammation that can
Yeah.
lead to chronic diseases.
That's a good explanation. And would that include canned food? Because I know a lot of cat
Mhm.
parents have woken up to the fact that dry food is bad, so they're moving their cats from dry to canned or pouches and things like that. But how do those fall in line?
Yeah. So canned food, in one study, canned food had higher ages content than kibble. In another study, the kibble came out higher. So it
Mhm.
depends on, they found it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the exact ingredients and the exact temperature and time at that high temperature
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
order to come up with the total ages content. But the takeaway is, just as you mentioned, canned is not better than kibble in terms of ages and ales content in that
Yeah.
food. So yeah, that might seem surprising, but canned food actually is heated at very high temperatures.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a vet, if you had to help a cat parent decide between dry food and wet food, would you always suggest the canned food over the dry just because of moisture and
Hmm.
kidneys and, cats being carnivores and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I would. So the canned foods have more moisture, like you mentioned, and chronic dehydration is a huge problem in kitties.
Yep.
Also, kibble has to have a really high carbohydrate content in order to make it stick together. They can't
Mhm.
make kibble. It can't go through the extruder unless it's got a lot of starch. And so starch is one of the implicating problems in that ages content. But
Mhm.
so that's in the canned versus kibble debate for cats. Canned will always win for me over kibble because of its relationship to diabetes. So
Mhm.
even very conventional veterinarians have come to understand that if we can get cats off dry food and onto canned food, sometimes we can reverse their type 2 diabetes just by doing that, nothing else.
Mhm.
So if I have to pick between kibble and canned, I would choose canned for cats,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah. That's what I've learned as well. And it makes sense when you think about it because cats are carnivores and they don't
Mhm,
process starch. Their bodies don't have a need for that in their
mhm,
diet, right? Um, and just touching off of that, some people think that going grain free is better than, you know,
mhm,
grain in when it comes to cats and cat food. Can you just
mhm.
briefly touch on that when it comes to the processed food?
Yeah. So grain free is kind of one of those buzzwords that people look for because they think it will be lower carbohydrate. Well,
Right.
it's usually not because
Mhm.
the companies have not used grains, but then they've put a bunch of things in there like beans and peas and lentils and other things that are just as high in carbohydrate content.
Mhm.
So we're not really winning anything there. And in fact, we can be losing a little bit in terms of losing protein there, amino acids, having some anti-nutrients in some of those foods that are maybe competing with the bioavailability of the nutrients kitties need.
Mhm.
So depending on how the company accomplishes grain free, it may or may not be better. But
Yeah.
just seeing that term grain free does not automatically mean that it is better.
Yeah. I think a lot of people fall for it because it's marketing, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
it's been ingrained to us that, oh, cats should not eat grains, right? Cats should
Yeah.
not eat grains. I think we've been programmed, we can all repeat that. So we're
Mhm.
automatically people are looking for the grain free. And
Yeah.
that was me. That was me years ago. So I tell
Mhm.
people all the time, I'm like, look, I used to do it all wrong. I have no
Yeah.
judgment on anybody. So, it's a learning process that we go
Mhm.
through. And we're like, oh, okay, I get
Yeah.
it.
And I should mention that there are times that we do use grains in kitty diets. Like if we have to reduce protein for those kitties that are in late stage kidney disease or something like that, or if
Mhm.
we have to get super low fat or something like that, we might use grains intentionally and very thoughtfully in
Mhm.
kitty diets. So it's hard to make a blanket statement that anything is all the way bad or anything is all the way good because it just depends on the circumstances.
Right.
And the other thing I do wanna bring up is I I'm become nervous that sometimes that people throw fiber out with the grains and the
Mm.
carbs. The
Yes.
kitties have to have fiber. They have
Thank
to.
you.
They have to. They have to.
Thank you for
There
saying
are
that.
so many constipated cats out there, and
Yes.
they're just not getting enough fiber. And the
Yep.
other thing is, all plant material is not bad. So if we think
Right.
about kitties, hunting and eating a mouse or a rabbit, they're going to eat the gut contents, and those
Mhm.
animals that they're eating are eating plants. So they're eating some plant material there. The reason plants are important beyond fiber, beyond like if the cat eats a mouse and it's eating the fur and all that other insoluble fiber that's going to help to bulk up stool, plant material contains polyphenols and antioxidants that can
Mhm.
help mitigate some of those even endogenous ages and ails that are being produced inside the animal's body.
Yeah.
So plant material is important even for obligate carnivores.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you probably mentioned this. It's not high quantities.
Right.
It's very tiny amounts, but it's
Yeah.
important to have that tiny amount matters, right?
It does. It does. And when we design diets, we can choose what plant that tiny amount is coming from to get
Mhm.
the functional benefits of that plant also. So, if I'm doing a diet for a kitty that needs some detoxification help, I might choose dandelion greens as my plant material there because I'm going to get that fiber, I'm going to get those polyphenols, I'm going to get that detoxification effect of the dandelion greens.
Yeah.
So we can get a two for benefit here. We can get our fiber and our polyphenols and pull in some other benefit from that food as well.
Yeah, exactly. Um, that brings me to another question. So, how can people minimize carcinogen risk? We've talked a little bit
Mhm.
about it, but
Yeah. Yeah. So the even if you have to feed mostly processed food, ultra processed food, if you can introduce even just a little bit of fresher food into that diet, you're moving the needle in a way that's positive.
yeah,
So sometimes I think it's easy to get overwhelmed and be like, well, forget it. I can't do the Cadillac option, so I might as well just not do anything at all. And that's
mhm,
not true. Even if you have to feed 98% kibble, if you can get 2% fresh food in the bowl, that's better than not.
yeah,
So, anything you can do to move along that spectrum with introducing fresh food is helpful. Whether that is if you poach a chicken breast for yourself and you give your kitty a little bit of that poached chicken breast, great.
mhm,
That's a little bit of fresh food there that is not as laden with some of those carcinogenic compounds. If we can introduce some of those plants in there as antioxidants so that we can help the body to get rid of some of those carcinogenic and other harmful compounds, that's helpful too.
yeah,
So introducing some of those things, making sure that your kitty's getting some omega-3 fatty acids, that helps to maintain that inflammatory response and keep it
mhm,
where it needs to be. So we can do things like that that can help even if the kitty has to be on an ultra processed diet for whatever reason.
yeah. Do you like using food options instead of supplements if possible?
Mm. I I do. My caveats there are number one, if the kitty will eat it,
Mhm.
and secondly, if we need a targeted dose, a specific dose of something,
Yeah.
sometimes that is hard to do with food.
Yes.
Like the cat would
Yes.
have to eat a huge amount of the food.
Yes.
So if that's the situation, then sometimes we have to go to a supplement. But
Mhm.
generally speaking, yes, if I can get the benefit from a whole food, I'd prefer to do that when I can.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday and they were asking me kind of that question. And I said the same thing. I said,
Mhm.
Penny, I don't think you could get the quantity that you need from a whole food source
Mhm.
because supplements do such a great job of consolidating everything in such a tiny amount, right?
Mhm.
It's condensed.
Yeah.
So you can get bigger bang for your buck.
Yep.
Um, but I love teaching people how to just, and like you said, just give them a bite of fresh food, give them a bite of this, give them a bite of
Mhm.
this, whatever it might be, just to introduce something other than their processed food. And
Mhm.
it's fun to watch them, explore and sniff and taste and, try something
Mhm.
and watch their little faces as they taste or, eat something new or discover something that
Mhm.
they love. Just to see their little faces light up and they get so excited. They're like, oh my gosh, I get sardines.
Yes, yes. One of my favorite episodes from my own cats with that is when my one cat discovered the joys of asparagus. I had
Oh,
roasted some asparagus for my family to eat, and I went into the other room. The pan was sitting on top of the stove cooling. I had just taken it out of the oven. I go in the other room and I hear her do her characteristic I've just hunted and killed something, which is always like something in the house. It's not an
uh-huh,
actual animal. And
right.
and I come back into the kitchen and she's walking around with a spear of roasted asparagus in her mouth doing her war cry like, "Look what I got, mom." And she ate the whole thing and she was just
Oh my gosh.
delighted with her
Isn't it-
asparagus spear.
That's so funny. That's so
Mhm.
funny. I love that. So, was it covered in butter?
It did have some olive oil on it, but it wasn't like
No.
swimming in oil.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you would have thought that she was just going for the fat, but there was
Yeah.
definitely like
Interesting.
just some plant that she was
Yeah.
all for.
That's so I love that so much. So let's kind of shift a little bit. Let's talk about how often should well how can people start to implement more fresh foods in their cat's diet? Like, is there a
Mhm.
percentage if someone is making a consolidated effort, how would you do that transition? Is there a set process that people should
Mm,
follow, and how strict should that be? And because I don't want people to
yeah.
feel overwhelmed. I want them to feel empowered to try something and see how
Mhm.
it goes, and
Mhm.
what kind of advice or guidance could you give people who want to start implementing, and how much should that be?
Yeah, and I think it's totally dependent on the individual cat. They're like toddlers that some of them are super picky, and it really takes a while to get them to transition over, and
Yep.
others are more adventurous in their eating habits and they're willing to dive right in.
Mhm.
So we have to look at that part of their personality and also what their gut health is like. Some kitties can tolerate an abrupt change in diet,
Yeah.
no problem. Other cats, you like, breathe on it wrong and they have diarrhea for 2 days. So
Mhm.
you kind of have to tailor this to your cat's temperament as well as GI function. So
Yep.
if your kitty is super, super sensitive and gets GI signs when anything is different, you do want to go pretty slow. So
Mhm.
that might look like, the tiniest little whisper of a new food introduced into the dish and just see how that goes. And if everything's stable, then a little whisper more. And like I'm not being super prescriptive on the amount here because literally it can be like the tiniest amount you can see. Start with
Yes.
that and
Yep.
see how it goes and just gradually build up. So you can take your transition as quickly as your cat tells you you can take your
Mhm.
transition. Yeah.
Mhm.
So for some cats that might be 2 days and for others it might be 2 years before you're
Yeah.
totally transitioned over.
Right. Right. Are there things that you would recommend them adding to the food or the bowl or supplement to make that transition more effective, easier, gentler on the gut? Um,
Mhm.
do you have any favorite things like enzymes or I don't know probiotics or anything like that you would recommend adding to it?
In terms of acceptance of the new diet, I think it's all about what that cat finds yummy, to be
Hmm.
honest.
Hmm.
So, I think for most kitties, starting with the protein is the easiest sell. Like most
Yeah.
cats are interested in fresh meat or organs or fish.
Yep.
So most of them will have some interest in that. And then if you are transitioning over to entirely a fresh diet, like we discussed, there will be other components to that. It can't just be meat and
Right.
organs and fish. That won't be complete and balanced. But
Right.
once you've got that kitty interested in those parts that they find yummy, then you can start tucking in some of the other ingredients that need to be incorporated to make that complete and balanced. And if you're switching over to a commercial raw food, you might
Hmm.
start by just, putting like this much of the commercial raw in
Hmm.
with the kibble or whatever you're feeding and just increase that proportion until you get to where you want to be. But the proteins are usually a good seller. And sometimes you start just with like the juices off of that protein. If you've got a
Hmm.
super picky kitty, just putting some of the juices there might be enough to get them to entertain a new taste on their palate.
Yeah, and getting them used to the smell, right? Just
Mhm.
because I think
Yeah.
there was a study, and I don't know when or where, but it talked about how they gave cats three different options of food, and one had like a protein with was it chicken with citrus or something, and there was two other options, and they thought they'll never pick the one with the citrus, but that was the most natural. And I can't remember what they called it,
Interesting.
and so they may have started eating one of the other two, but at the end of the study, they were all going to the one with citrus because their bodies somehow knew that that was the most nutritious and beneficial option of the three that they were given. And
Wow.
Jay knows the study better than she can recall it better than I can, but it was interesting, even despite the fact that it had a little citrus flavor in it or whatever. It's like their
Yeah.
bodies recognize after a while.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
it's that innate design, their design. Oh, thank you. She says the citrus flavored was the only balanced diet. And that's the one they ended up
Ah.
gravitating to and the
Mhm.
end because somehow their bodies knew that that was the best one for me versus the others. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting how we just have to, I think people get impatient. They wanted
Yeah.
it to happen yesterday. Why isn't my
Mhm.
cat eating this food? It's so much better for them. We know that, but they don't know that yet. Give them
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
Be patient. You know,
Yes.
I tell people all the time, they will wear out before you do. So you have to really pack your patience and hold your ground and be consistent because when parents just finally give in, right? They're like, "Oh, stop
Mhm.
crying! You're breaking my heart. I'm not starving. Here's your old food back," and they cave. So I said,
Yeah.
"You can't cave. You just have to stick to the plan." And eventually they come along. But like you said, some cats take a year or longer to
Mhm.
decide that they're going to be on board. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just go with
And
their
that's a
plan.
good point. When I do individual formulations for pet parents through ADF. And so say someone comes to me and they're like, my cat has XYZ medical issues, but also has sensitivities to all these foods and I'm having a hard time finding anything that my cat will eat and can eat without having
Mhm.
symptoms. Oftentimes one of my questions is, what foods is your cat gravitating toward? Like what is your cat telling you that he wants to eat? Let's start there and see if we can then steer the ship from some sort of common ground. Like if he's drawn to all things chicken, okay, fine. Let's see if we can make a chicken diet that and then make it complete and balanced. And if we eventually want him on something other than chicken, okay, maybe we can transition from that once we've had a win with getting him to a complete and balanced fresh food chicken diet.
Yeah,
So let's start
yeah,
with what your cat is telling you they want to eat. And like kids, when your kid wants to eat Cheetos, of course, you're not going to be like, okay, great, let's go on the Cheetos diet. But maybe
right.
you can glean some little morsel of information there that can be helpful in making a plan for how to get to where we want to be.
Yes, and that's a good transition point to talk about ADF. So let's say
Mhm.
someone's watching and they're like, "You know what? I'm tired of buying the commercial food. It's very expensive. I want to make my own." And that's a whole nother conversation, but making your own sometimes can be very cost saving for
Mhm.
those who are, if you want to put the time and the energy into doing all the work, it's worth it. Not everybody has that kind of time or interest. They just want to go buy something that's already made and cross your fingers, everything's balanced and complete and good, right? Even though it's in a store and labeled AFCO, doesn't always mean that it is, um, as we've learned on Inside Scoop. But
Mhm.
yeah, can you talk about like a resource that you would recommend for people who want to do this and they don't want to guess, they want to make sure they hit all the important parts and don't miss anything in their cat's diet. What's your secret?
Yeah, well, so Animal Diet Formulator is formulation software, and we have subscription levels for individual pet parents. So people can subscribe, and the software gives you that framework so that it'll show you as you enter ingredients, the software will show you, okay, well, you're still deficient in magnesium or potassium. And
Mhm.
furthermore, here's some suggestions for how you can add that nutrient to this diet, whether it's from a whole food or from a supplement. So
Mm.
people can use ADF to design their own diets there and see that it is complete and balanced to AFCO or to FEDIF or to NRC. Those are the three nutrient profiles that are available right now.
Okay.
And spoiler alert, I would use FEDIF if I were you because you
Hmm.
can set it to a less active setting there, which again, even for our young kitties who are, getting zoomies in the house, they're less active than what the active setting is for pet food. So that's not an indictment on anyone as a pet owner. It's not that you're not doing your job in giving your cat enrichment. It's that cats just aren't as active when they live in the house as they are if they're a barn cat in Minnesota in the winter. That's kind
Yeah,
of the difference there. So,
yeah.
so people can use ADF to formulate diets on their own, and so we have professional tiers for nutritionists, veterinarians, to use as well. And then commercial tiers, we do have commercial companies using ADF to formulate their diets. And I also do consultations through ADF. So if people want me to formulate a diet for their kitty, then I'm available to do that as well if people would prefer not to do it on their own.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So you guys who are watching, here's your chance to work with the amazing Dr. Susan Recker
Oh, thank you.
and let her do all the designing for you. Have a designer diet cat, I love that. And talk about like, are there like people could go in and design like combo protein diets or it's
Mhm.
mix and match and like, oh, my cat likes turkey and they like pork and they like venison. Can I put all those together and
Mhm.
all of that? So you can never you can never run out of options, right? Basically, there's
Yeah.
so many different
Yeah.
ways you could do it. There's that, and
Yeah.
the software just guides you through the whole process. So there's really
Mhm.
no miss. I think
Mhm.
probably the hardest part for people would be deciding what they want to feed their cat or getting their activity level right, right? Like,
Yeah.
because again, some cats are outdoors and some are
Mhm.
couch potatoes. So,
Mhm. Yeah. And so ADF will tell you, you enter your kitty's weight in there, and then depending on the activity level that you've selected, ADF will show you, okay, here's the number of calories a day that your cat needs for that activity level.
yeah.
And if you make your recipe and you're feeding it to that activity level and you're like, oh my gosh, that's way too much food. Cat can't eat this much food. Or my cat is loving to eat this much food, but is, expanding visibly before my eyes.
Mhm.
Obviously, I need to cut back. Then
Uh-huh.
you would adjust that activity level until you find the one that gives you the calories that do
Wow.
maintain your kitty at the proper weight, because that if you use ADF in the FEDF setting, it will then adjust the nutrient profile to give you how much nutrients you actually have to pack into that. Those numbers are going to change depending on your
Yeah,
cat's activity level. So that's the important piece there, is making sure as you're cutting back calories, you're putting more nutrients in.
that's a very good point. And that's something that you guys on Insight, you and Steve and Roddy and Karen, just in the last couple of years have really started to hit home with that. And Susan Thixton
Mhm,
too, I think.
mhm, mhm.
Going to the AFCO meetings and trying to get FDA to change the regulation based on this information. We can't just cut calories because you are cutting nutrients. And I
Yeah,
think that's brilliant because before you guys started talking about that, nobody was talking about that. It's like
yeah,
we didn't
yeah,
even think about that, you know?
yeah. Well, and it's hard for the average pet parent because you can't get that information from most pet food bags or even
Yeah,
on the website. They don't tell you that. And so how would you know that your
right.
pet's not getting adequate nutrition? That's the part that frustrates me the most.
Well, and I'll bet you even pet food companies don't even have the answer to that. They don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they know, but
Do
they
you
won't
think they
tell us.
know? Because
I
they
think
don't
the
they
big
don't
ones do.
put activity levels necessarily on their bags or on their products or on their website.
Yeah. If
So
we're talking about the big pet food companies, the real big ones,
okay, yeah,
processed pet food,
yeah.
they have done extensive testing on their food. They know what all those nutrients are. They've
Okay,
done lots. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, and I
Mhm.
don't shop the big pet food companies.
Yeah. Yeah. And the smaller ones, like they know what should be in it. They know how it's formulated, but they
Yeah.
might not know what's actually in it because testing is expensive. So,
Yeah.
the big pet food companies, they're testing their foods multiple times. So they have a good idea. It's going to be
Mhm.
different every time, right? Because
Yeah.
there is some natural variability in food. So every
Yep.
time they test a batch, it's going to be slightly different than the batch before. They've got a bunch of test results, so they know what a representative nutrient
Mhm.
analysis is for their food. That might not be true for some of these smaller pet food companies that are trying to do a beautiful job. Like they've
Yes.
formulated well, they're using great sourcing, but they might not be able to afford to do full nutrient testing on their foods on a regular basis, so they might not have a good idea of what's actually in it.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. And that made me think of another question that just went over my head. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe it'll come back to me, but it was something around what you were just talking about. Maybe it'll come back. I can't think of it right now. But um, yeah, there's so much to consider. And my goal here is not to overwhelm the pet parent who wants to start feeding fresher. So
Yeah.
um, if you were to give them your best advice for taking the steps into starting to feed fresh, what's your best advice for them?
Like for someone who's starting from the far end of the spectrum on like feeding kibble currently.
Or just
Yeah, I
making any kind of a change. Some people are just
Mm.
like, I'm either 100% or I'm not doing it, or
Yeah.
which is set people
Yeah.
set you up for failure, right? Because you miss
Yeah.
it and then you feel like, oh, I can't do this.
Yep. Yep.
What would your best advice be, just in general, to people who want to start making change?
Mhm. Well, I mean, I guess my advice is let's work together to get over that 100% or nothing mentality, because that almost never works for anything.
No,
And
no.
especially in this journey, truly any improvement you make, any fresh food addition you make improves the bowl of food, improves your kitty's health. So truly, tiny little changes add up to big results. So start small. Start literally with one tiny little morsel of fresh food. And if your kitty eats it, great. Build on that the next day or the next week or the next month, whenever you can. So please don't get discouraged. Just go at the pace that you can go, do what you can do, and
Yeah.
adding any bit of fresh food, whether it's fresh food from your kitchen or a commercial fresh food, starting to make that transition. And then when you get to a point that works for you and your kitty, that you can transition totally over to a fresh food diet that is complete and balanced,
Yes.
then you'll be ready to be at 100%. And if you never get to 100%, that's okay too. Just remember that any improvement you make to that bowl will have benefits for your kitty.
Yeah. And that's a great place to end. As we wrap this up, can you tell people where they can find you? And if they wanted to work with you, how can they reach out? And are you on any social platforms that they can follow you? All that good stuff. Because I want to give you an opportunity to kind of put your name and your face out there for people who want to learn more from you and maybe work with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. I'm at animaldietformulator.com. So that's our website there. And on the website, there's an area that says it says services. And then if you click on that, there's consultation services. And if you click on that, it'll say request now. So you put your request in and I'll be the one who will see it and I will respond to you. And we can talk about whether you need consultation services for your kitty. And I'm happy to help with that. Animal Diet Formulator is on Instagram. I am on socials, but I'm just a lurker. I'm not a poster, so you won't see much from me there.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, you're busy. Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. This is amazing information, and I hope people are finding it as they listen to the replay or the recordings. I hope that they'll take lots of notes and find this very helpful because it is an aspect of nutrition that doesn't get a lot of spotlight, but it's so important as we learn more from studies that are coming out that are kind of starting to find this information and to get it out there in the public space so that people can start to realize, oh my gosh, I need to make some changes. And it's not as overwhelming as I think because change is hard for people. You know, they like their routine, they like to get set in their ways, they like convenience of doing the way they've always done it. So when we start to try to build a new routine, it can be a little bit of a challenge to make those small changes. But in the end, I mean, your cat's health and longevity is really worth it. And the people who are on these platforms that follow us, they're already sold, right? They're like, I'm in. I'll do anything for my cat. They're not just an animal. They're not just a pet that stays in the yard, but they're family. And so that's we want to feed them like we eat. We want to feed them better, which is great. So
yeah,
thank you
absolutely
so much for being here, and I appreciate your time and your expertise.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure, Pam.
You're welcome. Well, you guys, let us know if you have any questions, drop them in the comments, share the show out so we can get this in front of more people. And we will be back again with another show very soon. So thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.